The Bible, specifically the New Testament, how was it formed? Who chose the 27 books that are included in the Protestant Bible? I know the Catholics have 52 books. I'm not going to argue for the Catholics. I'm not going to argue for their Bible. The 27 books that are considered to be part of the canon. Now, these 27 books have always been accepted by the early church. Certainly we do know that because we can look at the early church fathers' writings, and they all quote from these 27 books specifically, and also quote from auxiliary books that were authoritative but not canonical.
Eusebius is the first church historian, and around the years somewhere between 320 and 330, he wrote that the church recognized 22 books and letters for inclusion in the canon, what we call the New Testament today. So the G4 stands for our four Gospels, and then you got Acts, 10 of Paul's letters, and you'll see how I divide these, 10 of Paul's letters and then 3 of Paul's letters. And the reason I put the 3 times here is because those 3, we will see, were questioned whether Paul wrote those in antiquity and whether they should be included in the New Testament. You have Hebrews. Well, we got some things. I think it's on the computer here that's doing it. So I'm guessing that says 1 Peter and 1 John and Revelation. And then you had Eusebius said that there were 5 that were doubtful. James, Jude, 2 Peter, 2 and 3 John. So these but these generally in his day were considered doubtful, so they weren't included in any kind of New Testament. Which is interesting here. You find in the Da Vinci Code, and some people who still repeat it today, that said at Constantine at the Council of Nicaea determined which books and letters to put into the New Testament and which to exclude. That wasn't even discussed at the Council of Nicaea. And we can see when Eusebius, who was present at the Council of Nicaea, there were only 22 of the 27 books and letters of the New Testament that were included in, we could say, Eusebius's canon.
The Apocalypse of Peter, which denies that Jesus is dead. The Gospel of Thomas, which is a Gnostic, denies the resurrection, Gnostic writing. Both those are 2nd century. They are not written by any of the apostles. They were not accepted by the early church. They are written much, much too late to even belong to the canonical books. And so that's the reason why they were always rejected.
Then you have Cyril of Jerusalem around the year 350, just a couple decades later. He had the 4 Gospels, but he also included the Gospel of Thomas. And he's the only one ever to have done that. He had Acts, he had all 13 of Paul's letters. He had all the 27 books and letters that we have today, with the exception of Revelation. He excluded that because he said John didn't write it, but he included the Gospel of Thomas.
It's great to know that our canon goes right back to the 1st century. It's great to know that those people who put it together knew what they were talking about, knew the people who wrote the books. And I'm so happy for that reason, because I know, therefore, I can trust it. I can trust the 27 books that are there.
Then you have the Carthage Synod of 397. They said, well, upon more thought, we think Revelation doesn't belong in there. So they approved the 26, but they took Revelation out. In 419, they met together again, and they said, well, we've given it some more thought. We think we're going to include it. So you can see this wasn't something that they took lightly. They debated it, and they debated it for centuries. It wasn't something that a single council just came to a decision. They said, hey, we like these, we don't like these.
More than that, we know that when they were chosen for a purpose. I trust them. I hope you do as well.
How did the New Testament become compiled into a single volume? And this is something, there's differences of opinion on this. I remember what I learned back in grad school back in the 80s was I have a different opinion now than back then. It just seemed like it was a cut and dry thing the way I was taught back then. And now I have to admit it's a little muddier of a process. It's fuzzier than what I originally thought it was. And it's something that, to be honest with you, I'm not entirely comfortable with.
More than that, we know that when they were chosen for a purpose. I trust them. I hope you do as well.
Now, how did these books and letters come to be included in our New Testament? Why these and not others? Well, we really don't know. There isn't anyone out there that says, here are the criteria for being included in the canon. It'd be nice if that was there, but we don't have that. So these would be some of the criteria that we think they may have used. Now, does that mean that these criteria are divinely inspired? No. Should there have been some others? I don't know. That's just kind of what appeared what they used. But that does leave open some questions. What about when it comes to relevant? And we know that some of Paul's letters are missing. Paul wrote 3 or 4 letters to the church at Corinth. We only have 2. In one of Paul's prison epistles, he mentions the letter that he wrote to the church of Laodicea. Do we have it? Well, we don't have any letter that's addressed to the church of Laodicea. There's some different theories. Some think that the Ephesians was a circular letter that was passed to many different churches, or it was a generic letter, and that on one of those, Paul wrote to the church at Ephesus, but he could have put to the church at Laodicea and sent the same letter to the Laodicea church. We don't know. But we could be missing a letter to the church at Laodicea. We are certainly missing 1, if not 2 letters to the church at Corinth. So, let's say some archaeologists are digging around and they find an ancient manuscript in Greek, and it's Paul's letter to the church at Laodicea. And we check it grammatically, linguistically, and we determine, hey, this is definitely Pauline. Well, it doesn't have widespread, long-standing usage, so it wouldn't meet that criteria. But what if it had something relevant in it for today's church? For example, what if Paul said in there, now I hear that some of you had received a copy of my letter that I wrote to the church at Rome, and you were experiencing a lot of anxiety and confusion over what I was saying about predestination and election. And I'd like to clarify that for you in this letter. Are we saying that wouldn't be, of course that would be relevant to the church today. Are we saying that we should not consider that for inclusion in the New Testament canon? I think that would introduce some real interesting discussions, wouldn't it? We'd have to be open to discussing it, of course. So I think that would be real interesting. So we do have some questions that would be like that. Do I think we're going to find such a letter? Probably not. But if we did, we'd have to have some discussions on that, wouldn't we?